It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast, the show that's so nice we do it twice. Unbelievable job by my guy, John Daigle, on episode 1 this week. I wrote down multiple things about Joe Mixon and the Texans offense, Nico Collins, how they're struggling, the difference for the Steelers with and without George Pickens, the fact that the Falcons have basically given up on Kirk Cousins throwing the ball, James Conner as a value pick, Jahmyr Gibbs going nuclear, multiple Mason Rudolph stats. Yeah, I take notes. I'm listening while John's talking. Check him out on social media. At NotJDaigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. He comes to us from EstablishTheRun.com, where they have established an incredible business. It's Evan Silva. You know him, former longtime host of the show. Adam Levitan as well. Go over to EstablishTheRun.com anytime. Use the code FEAST to get a discount on their tremendous content. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod, and we greatly appreciate those of you that take 3 seconds to give us a 5-star review for all the time John puts in every week to have an incredible amount of information. It's awesome. Whether you're into fantasy or not, there's a lot of terrifically valuable information. What about the Eagles and Commanders here to start out episode number 2 this week, John?
I'm worried about the Commanders. It's a big divisional game, so perhaps they have something in their bag that Cliff Kingsbury hasn't showed us just yet. But this Eagles defense continues to be one to not mess with. We're at the time of the year as well where lots of backup quarterbacks are going in just because it gets cold. There's 17 games with only one bye week, lots of injuries happening. And so it's our job, it's my job, to provide context every week saying, okay, well, yes, this quarterback was good, or this defense was good, but also they played this quarterback. The Eagles have just really been quarterback agnostic. They have enough talent to break down everyone they face. Since their bye, and this is a stretch since week 6, the Eagles are allowing a league low 5.6 yards per attempt through the air. No quarterback has passed for over 250 yards in that time. And again, that's roughly a 10-game stretch. Also on the ground, so you say, okay, well, we can't pass for the Eagles, we'll beat them on the ground. 3.7 yards per carry allowed the running backs. Honestly, you can't do anything against Philadelphia. We even saw this past week, Nick Sirianni, Jordan Davis pushing each other on the sideline, getting into arguments. And I know all the talk, you know this better than anyone, Ross, like all the Philly media is discussing like how combustible the Eagles are, all these little things that happen on their sideline, but they've won 10 games in a row. Like, this is the Super Bowl favorite right now because it's not just through their defense. They find other ways to break you down. We even saw A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith have 74% of their targets. Jalen Hurts rightfully does not throw the ball anywhere else because why would you ever need to? And if a defense can stop that passing game, okay, we have Saquon Barkley. And if you don't have Saquon Barkley, he gets banged up this last week. Okay, Kenneth Gainwell gets the last 3 carries to ice the game and get that win for Philadelphia. They just have so many ways they can pulverize you and put you in a blender that this is why they are the favorites. And so despite all the discussion about how childish Nick Sirianni may be, how poor some of his in-game coaching decisions are, it doesn't matter. The Eagles are here to stay because they're just so loaded on both sides of the ball. And that's why I worry about the Commanders. No Austin Eckler yet again, still in injured reserve with a concussion. We will see what happens for Jaden Daniels. But honestly, even though Dyami Brown popped up last week, 4 targets, 30 receiving yards as the team's wide receiver 2, I'm not sure if we're going to have Zach Ertz for this game. And really against this defense, Terry McLaurin, the only player we can have confidence in outside of Jaden Daniels, of course, for fantasy.
And then the Eagles offensively, anything jump out?
I would say we're just waiting for A.J. Brown and his availability. Got nicked up, said after the game he would play through that knee injury. But if he does not, remember, we have seen 2 starts this year that Devonta Smith made without A.J. Brown, and he saw 34% and 28% of their targets. Also, the last 2 games since Smith himself returned from injury, he's really gotten back into our good graces as a wide receiver 1 borderline for fantasy. 32% and 39% of their targets. So either way, It certainly helps if A.J. Brown's out, Devonta Smith, all the targets go to him. But maybe it's just the fact that Devonta Smith will go in this stretch where he out-targets A.J. Brown anyhow.
Next up, the Browns with a new quarterback against the Bengals. Anybody streaming DTR this week?
I don't think so, unfortunately. At least based on last year's performance. When DTR went under center last year, the Browns averaged 4 yards per pass play, and they were dead last in EPA per play on offense. DTR was not the answer, at least last year. So maybe some development over the offseason has helped him to potentially elevate this offense. I have my doubts. I think the Bengals are a streaming defense for fantasy. The Bengals have no defense. But again, we are at the time of the year where you just play defenses against bad quarterbacks. And that's what I believe this Brown situation and DTR are. For their backfield, Nick Chubb, unfortunately, suffers that broken foot. Jerome Ford came off the bench, exploded for a 62-yard touchdown. And we've at least seen this situation before. Because in those first 5 games, the teams did not have Nick Chubb and had to lean on Jerome Ford. He was explosive. 5.2 yards per carry. The issue is that Deontay Foreman was used as their goal line in that time. 49% of their team's carries inside the 5-yard line. And so I think that does cap Ford's ceiling. Having said that, this is still a very poor Bengals defense that everyone is successfully both passing and running on. So I think Ford is still a strong RB3 flex option regardless of DTR and what happens to this offense as a whole. I am a little bit more worried, however, about Jerry Jeudy, who was exploding with at least 20% of the team's targets in 4 consecutive games from Jameis Winston. And now from DTR, I think the floor gets a lot lower in this spot. For the Bengals, you know exactly where the ball's going to go and what's going to happen. Because now, Joe Burrow, a franchise record, by the way, 36 touchdowns on the season. And the targets are consistently going to Jamar Chase, who is pacing and most likely going to win the Triple Crown. Just the 5th player in NFL history, by the way, Chase is, with at least 100 catches, 1,400 receiving yards, and 15 touchdowns in a single season. The other 4 players, Hall of Famers. Marvin Harrison, Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, and Cooper Kupp did so in 2021. So Chase, it tells you how historically great he's been this year. But the ball goes to him, T. Higgins, and then, of course, Chase Brown getting involved as well. This past week had a touchdown. And so, yes, that's the Bengals offense. This is a Browns secondary that has continued to allow big plays, top 5, and completions 20 yards downfield. So I just think it's a game where the Bengals offense will have no issues pushing the ball, moving downfield, and scoring points.
What about the Vikings and the Seahawks? I was disappointed by the Seahawks Sunday night, John.
Yeah, and maybe it's because Geno Smith got injured early on, but even when Smith was out there, they were struggling through the air. I don't blame them for that. The Packers defense, the Packers are trending to being a Super Bowl contender, just from how they've morphed their offense after the bye. We'll talk about that in a bit when we discuss the Packers Monday night game. But I attribute that just to them having a stout defense that you can't run on. So although Zach Charbonnet popped for that long 20-yard touchdown outside the red zone, beyond that, he still struggled mightily around that big carry because the Packers have been suffocating running backs. And it's kind of the same issue here. DeAndre Swift goes over 70 rushing yards for the first time in 3 games on Monday night against this Vikings defense. But historically, you still can't run on this Vikings defense this year. And so Zach Charbonnet, if he's out there as an every down running back, you still start him, an RB2 in fantasy. I am a little bit worried, though. It sounds optimistic. Ken Walker could return. And Charbonnet has been so good that I bet it becomes more of a committee between him and Ken Walker, which lowers their floors for fantasy and makes you think that neither can actually get there as RB1s since they're no longer handling every single touch. And also, we're waiting word on Geno Smith. It sounds optimistic. He could play. But if Sam Howell, who took the league's highest sack rate last year, gets this Brian Flores blitz defense, it's over. I have no confidence in Seahawks offense whatsoever in this spot. So cross your fingers, it's Geno Smith at home. Otherwise, I am worried. The player I still like is Jackson Smith-Njigba, unsurprisingly. I blame DK Metcalf's injury that he's returned from the last month to his struggles. Either way, JSN has seen more targets and more receiving yards than Metcalf in that time. And the Vikings are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing slot receivers, where JSN runs a majority of his routes. So that's my favorite pick on offense for the Seahawks. For the Vikings, Sam Darnold, a very poor game. A divisional matchup against the Bears, 5.5 yards per attempt. Everyone even watching that game saw him struggle throughout. But Justin Jefferson still gets there for a touchdown. This is the second game in a row. Jordan Addison as well has drawn a 40-plus yard downfield penalty that has negated his own receiving yards. But Addison is sticking right in line with Jefferson in terms of targets over the last month together. So I think they've still really found something in condensing their target tree, getting Hawkinson involved underneath, but really this is still Jefferson's and Addison's show. And yet again, another good spot here for the Vikings passing game.
Love it almost as much as I love Labatt Blue Light, which is so delicious. And I'll be drinking that. Hopefully they have it in Indianapolis Friday night. I'll be watching Notre Dame and Indiana in Indianapolis. That city will be buzzing, even though the game's up at South Bend. Drink some Labatt Blue Lights while you're watching football this weekend with friends and family. Live life to the power of we. It's the holiday season. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Patriots, Bills. What do you got?
Oh, what do the Patriots have? Because they're going to need something here. Josh Allen's last 2 games, all indoors, mind you. So if Buffalo fans want to make the case to build a dome, just know that Josh Allen's last 2 games indoors, 704 passing yards, 9.9 yards per attempt, 10 touchdowns from scrimmage with 0 interceptions and 0 sacks. Those are MVP numbers. And now we return home against the Patriots as, last I checked on DraftKings, 14-point favorites. Although Josh Allen has been amazing, I do not think this is the type of environment where the Patriots are going to be capable of pushing back, especially against this defense that got Matt Milano back. I know it doesn't look like it because Jared Goff passed for 500 yards, but the Bills' defense is still rounding into form and getting better. A lot of that was also on Jared Goff's last garbage time drive to make it a 1-score game. But this Bills defense, since they are getting better, I think it's going to be a game where Josh Allen is backed off of a little bit. We've seen this in the past. I think back to the first month of the season and their big win over Miami, where they just didn't ask Josh Allen to do anything. Just turn around and hand the rock over. And that's what I believe this game is going to be for James Cook. James Cook popped up for over 100 yards, a couple explosive plays for the Bills last week against the Lions. But I think this is going to be one where he even leads the team in carries over Josh Allen and has an RB1 ceiling, since the Patriots have really struggled against opposing running backs in their last 3 games. James Conner, everyone saw this past week, 110 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor went over 100 yards from scrimmage with a touchdown against them. And then Devon Achane before that had 2 touchdown catches. So love James Cook in this matchup. I know we saw Ty Johnson, Ray Davis pop up. I attribute their usage to the Lions leading the league in man coverage, and I bet Joe Brady, Bills offensive coordinator, saw something in getting Ty Johnson involved against linebackers downfield and said, that's how we can beat Detroit secondary. And by the way, they were right. Ty Johnson had 3 20-yard catches in that game. So I don't expect them to be used as such in this kind of matchup. For the Patriots, it's a little tougher. Ramondre Stevenson goes over 60 yards rushing this past game, leads the team with 13 carries. That's how you beat the Bills. Unfortunately, the Bills kind of found an identity this past week against the Lions where they know their struggles are in their run defense. But if you build a big enough lead, you don't have to worry about opponents running against you. I think that's what's going to happen here. So I have a lack of confidence in Ramondre Stevenson, unfortunately. Hunter Henry, really the only player outside of Drake May, if you're streaming him, that I would be playing in fantasy for the Patriots.
Jacksonville Jaguars against the Raiders.
The Jaguars have allowed a league-high 25 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and that's kind of all I have to say about Aiden O'Connell and this passing offense. Jacoby Myers has been amazing, and what's funny is that while Brock Bowers has sunk down, some of it's Antonio Pierce's fault, some of it's Scott Turner's fault, a lot of it can be attributed to Desmond Ridder, who just hasn't been able to get the ball to Brock Bowers at all the past 2 weeks. Jacoby Myers hasn't gone anywhere as a wide receiver 2 for fantasy in that time. So still have a lot of faith in Jacoby Myers in this game. Brock Bowers, we are hoping for AOC under center just to get him back up since these last 2 games, 16 and 17.5% of the team's targets. Unacceptable for a player like Brock Bowers to not find a way to get him involved more intricately. For Jacksonville's offense, I also have a lot of confidence in. Mac Jones, last week against the Jets, completed 78% of his passes when he was not under pressure. And then we've seen now Las Vegas's defense, without Max Crosby on the field, they have dropped to 21st in creating pressure. So I think Mac Jones will not be under duress, will have a lot of free time in the pocket to look downfield. And if that's the case, we know exactly where he's going to go to. Because Brian Thomas and Britton Strange became the poor man's version of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. They boxed out the rest of Jacksonville's teammates for 30 targets for Mac Jones last week. Brian Thomas in particular, his last 4 games, 25, 24, 40, and 32.5% of the team's targets. Just dominating as a rookie in the second half of the season, especially against man coverage. Britton Strange also, you can look to that one game and say, okay, double-digit catches, 70 receiving yards, a blip on the radar in place of Evan Ingram. But that's not the case, because remember, Britton Strange made 4 starts for Evan Ingram earlier this year. So now that's 5 starts total. And in 4 of those starts, he's been a top 10 tight end in fantasy. So Britton Strange, I talked about in the first episode, players I want to pick up and stream over Kyle Pitts, Kate Otten, Cole Kmet, others. Britton Strange is absolutely a top 10 tight end this week that you should be picking up and starting in the fantasy playoffs.
Ooh, okay. I like nuggets like that. All right. This is an interesting one. They have explosive offenses sometimes. It's the Niners and the Dolphins both coming off pretty disappointing games.
And we saw a couple weeks ago Brock Purdy lead the entire league, every quarterback in EPA per play. And then last week against the Rams, a complete dud. Rained for 2 quarters. Rained for 1 quarter. It was pouring for 15 minutes. Beyond that, though, it was still just a really ugly affair between a divisional opponents. So it's hard to have faith. 10 days rest for the 49ers gives them a little bit of confidence, even though they are traveling across the country. And for the Dolphins, a poor game from Tua. I think it's because of the Texans defense. We talked about in the first episode how the Texans, for all their struggles, at least on defense, D'Amico Ryan's unit can still create pressure. And Tua was under pressure at his highest rate in any game all year. The Dolphins do have injuries in their offensive line. They are shuffling some players around, so that could be it. But also, with Nick Bosa slowly coming back into form at full strength, that's not a good sign if he's going to be out there and the Dolphins are continuing to try to find answers in their offensive line. So the whole premise of Miami's offense has been to get rid of the ball as quickly as possible underneath and ask your receivers to get upfield. Without Odell Beckham and Jalen Waddle injured, we're still waiting news on Jalen Waddle to see if he's going to be available. We saw their 6th-round rookie, Malik Washington, lead the team in receiving yards as that guy they peppered underneath near the line of scrimmage. And so for deeper leagues, sure, that's fine. But we obviously still want more Tyreek Hill. Jonnu Smith pops up for another touchdown. We can continue starting him as even a top 5 tight end. But do we have faith in these offenses? I'm like you. Even when I was breaking this game down for my own notes, I was questioning we should get points. But what we've seen from these two teams, the roller coasters, I'm genuinely not sure. Either way, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, and Isaac Guerendo. Guerendo now, who in his last 2 weeks, when he's been available, he has outtouched Patrick Taylor 37-1. Kyle Shanahan does not go anywhere else. Those are the 3 guys I have the most confidence in. Deebo Samuel, you should look elsewhere. On waiver wires, for example, Quentin Johnston's out there, Romeo Doubs, Jalen McMillan for the Bucs, who we're about to talk about. In my opinion, those guys are better plays than Deebo Samuel in fantasy right now.
I wonder what happened to Deebo Samuel, man. It's not good.
Yeah, and he was open. Like, 2 of those drops were completely on him, including a 30-yard touchdown that could have swung the entire game for the Niners. Maybe it's the injury. I don't know if there's anything going on behind the scenes that he's returned from, but it's not pretty right now, especially after he called for the ball. Shanahan gave him the ball, and then he just couldn't answer the call.
I will say a couple of the Tua picks were definitely on him, but
Yeah.
You're right. Being down both starting offensive tackles against the Texans with Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter,
They got
that
crushed.
was not ideal. What about? I'm curious about this. The Bucs are on fire. Mike Evans is incredible, and they're going against the Cowboys team that is not quitting. And Rico Dowdle has been playing.
Rico Dowdle now, on all 25 of his carries last week, gained positive yardage. Wasn't stuffed at the line of scrimmage at all. It makes you wonder, why the hell they didn't get him involved earlier in the year, to be quite honest. Because now in his last 4 games, Rico Dowdle has touch counts of 22, 25, 19, and 25. There was even that time where they called an illness. I'm kind of skeptical about that diagnosis. And Sunday night, whenever they promoted Dalvin Cook, just to get Rico Dowdle out of the way, gave Dalvin Cook a few carries. And now they can't even give him a single carry because they know the results of it. So why it took so long, I'm not sure. But yes, Rico Dowdle is trending towards a weekly RB1 given his performance he's shown the last month, especially in this game that has the highest total of any game in Week 16 at DraftKings. So we're expecting points. And I think we're expecting points also because this is basically a homecoming game for Mike Evans, who grew up in Galveston, went to college at my alma mater, Texas A&M Aggies, gig 'em, and then Trevon Diggs is also out for the year now with knee surgery. So who can the Cowboys even call on to stop Mike Evans, who only needs 86 receiving yards per game to go over that 1,000-yard threshold that's basically been obligatory for him since he entered the league as a first-round ballot Hall of Famer. So Mike Evans, a big game, and what we've really seen also for Baker Mayfield, who's been a gunslinger the last 3 weeks. Reminiscent of Brett Favre, honestly, where he has more turnovers, but honestly, I think it's because he's just gotten a little more comfortable and pushing the ball aggressively downfield. We've seen him find a second confident receiver in rookie Jalen McMillan, who they had to have. McMillan suffered a hamstring injury twice mid-year and then slowly recovered after their bye. But they had to have a second option, a true downfield option for Chris Godwin before they enter the playoffs most likely. And Jalen McMillan now has popped up as the wide receiver 9 and wide receiver 18 in back-to-back games with 23 and 25% of their targets behind Mike Evans. I do think he's the second option. And with the Cowboys struggling in their secondary for both performance reasons and with injuries, I think both Evans and McMillan can answer as at least top 24 wide receivers here, both of them. And also for the running game, I mean, Bucky Irvin is just going through it, battling multiple injuries, and he still pops up for another 50-yard run this past game, goes over 100 yards rushing for the Buccaneers with Rachaad White chipping in their receiving game. So Bucky Irving also, despite the injuries, just a player we have all the confidence in the world in right now, and I'm expecting a lot of points here.
A lot of holiday parties going on. Hopefully everywhere you go, or certainly if you're hosting the party, they have Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. Obviously, more opportunities this year to watch football and make delicious Smirnoff cocktails than ever before. We already had Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now there's 2 games on Christmas. Then you got the Saturday games after that. This holiday season, when you're enjoying the game and your cocktails, please make sure to drink responsibly. Take a minute, make a plan, never drive impaired. Smirnoff, we do game days. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Love it. Absolutely love it. We got one more. It's the Saints and the Packers. Saints marching in with Spencer Rattler, who kind of lit up the Commanders in the second half.
The Saints are marching more uphill than in this game. Traveling to Lambeau mid-December with Spencer Rattler under center for Derek Carr, who has been diagnosed as most likely out for the year with his broken hand. I am very worried. We talked about the Packers defense and what they limited the Seahawks to, but what they're really doing is they're creating pressure, and more importantly, they changed the identity of their offense. Jordan Love has been incredible in 5 games out of their bye, over 10 yards per attempt. But why he typically doesn't pop as a QB1 for fantasy, despite being amazing on the field, is because they've scaled him back, and they've instead become a running team similar to the Eagles. The Packers are 24th in pass attempts and 28th in drop back rate in their last 5 games out of their bye. And that's because they're just hammering Josh Jacobs with over 24 touches per game, including 30 this past week against the Seahawks. Against this Saints defense that's still struggling against the run, I expect the Packers offense to do the same here and just lean on Josh Jacobs. If and when he were to pass, we are waiting to see if Christian Watson's injured. The last play of that game against Seattle, Jordan Love throws a deep bomb down the left sideline to Christian Watson. He dives for it, and then he rolls off the sideline and can't stand up. He had to be helped up. I'm not sure how many people noticed that. And so I'm waiting to see their injury report and see if he's going to be available in this game. Romeo Doubs, of course, popped up with 2 touchdowns last week in his return from concussion. Only 19.5% of the team's targets, so the Packers' target tree is still very feisty from Jordan Love. It's still very, very hard to predict where exactly the ball will go. But Christian Watson involved on deep shots, Dobbs still leading the team in routes run, and then, of course, Dontavian Wicks involved if Jaden Reed is a rotational player or if Christian Watson's out. Again, it's just very hard to predict. For the Saints also, we're waiting out words on injuries because Alvin Kamara is battling one that may leave him out for this game. And if that's the case, we've at least seen Kendre Miller come off the bench last week, had the only running back touches behind Kamara, Jamal Williams not involved at all. And in the last 2 games since Kendre Miller returned from injured reserve, he's run 23 routes to Jamal Williams 6. He's the player I imagine interim head coach Darren Rizzi will feature if Kamara is not available. So although it's a tougher spot where the Saints, when it all said and done at DraftKings, I believe they're going to be 2 14-point dogs on the road here. As an every touch running back, Kendre Miller can still get the job done in the second round of the fantasy playoffs.
Fantastic work as always this week, John. Next week we got the fantasy championships and a lot of people playing DFS, or you're just me at this point. I'm out of it, but I love getting your information every week. At Not J Daigle, I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. We're stuffed. We're done. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.